Hello and welcome everybody to our latest normative webinar. We're going to be looking at the road to COP30 today, which I'm sure is on the top of many of your minds attending today's session. Just going to give a minute at the beginning here for people to join and get set up on the platform before we dive into the content. So before we do, welcome, and would love to hear where everyone is joining us from today. There's a good chance to show you where the chat button is. It's in the bottom right hand corner of your screen. You can see the chat button. So if you want to drop in where you're joining us from today, that would be great. I know we're a bit spread around. I'm in Skåne in the south of Sweden. Alex up in Stockholm, and Anna, you're up in Norway today, so we're spreading ourselves around. And Farah again in Stockholm, and Ella from Copenhagen. Welcome on board. Not too far from where I am at the moment. So I think we've got a few more people joining now. So we will get started. Lots from Stockholm today, a very strong contingent. So you're probably not too far away from Alex if you want to follow up with a question after the webinar. But I will kick us off today by going through a little bit of housekeeping before we dig into the webinar. We're going to be on for 45 minutes today, and that does include a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, please do drop it into the questions tab. There's a separate to the chat tab on the bottom right. There's a questions button there. So at any point during the webinar, feel free to drop your questions in there, and we can collate them and get to them in that Q&A session at the end. We will also be recording the webinar. So if you want to watch this back or share with colleagues weren't able to attend today, you can from tomorrow, if you click the registration link in your email, then you will be able to see the recorded on-demand version of this webinar as well. And thank you, Mark down in Chelmsford, practicing your Swedish here. Good to have you all with us, everybody. So without any further ado, I'll run through the speakers that we have the pleasure of joining us today, and a quick intro to what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to kick things off after this introduction to the webinar with looking at Business Sweden in particular. We have Anna Sundlöf Eriksson from Business Sweden, who is going to guide us through Business Sweden's role in particular at COP, as well as our focus and priorities for this year's event. Dr. Alex Schmidt, an expert advisor at Normative, is also going to be joining us to look at Normative's engagement at this year's COP and to put that into context. And then we're going to dive into a panel discussion with both Anna and Alex to discuss the practicalities, the specifics, what COP30 could mean for businesses, among other topics as well, before we jump into the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So before we jump in, I'd like to just introduce both of our speakers. Anna, fantastic to have you with us today. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a few words on you and your role at Business Sweden, that'd be great.
Of course. Thanks, Mike, and thanks so much for having Business Sweden as part of this fantastic webinar. So my name is Anna Sundlöf Eriksson. I am a senior product manager at Business Sweden and head of partner engagements within Business Sweden's global COP team. So the team working closely with our 27 partners on the road to COP30 and beyond.
Well, it's fantastic to have you with us. Always a pleasure to partner with Business Sweden over the years, and really appreciate you joining us today, Anna. And Alex, would love you to just kind of introduce yourself to the audience of those of you who don't know you. It'd be great if you could just give a very quick introduction to yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So my name is Alex. I'm an advisor to Normative and have actually been partnering with Anna and Business Sweden team for the last 3 years. So we've been to the last 3 COPs together, really a long-standing and very important relationship for Normative And within Normative, one of my main hats is around scientific integrity and also leadership in this space of where do we need to go as an industry together. And it's, of course, partly what Business Sweden and the whole business network does when we are engaging with and at the COPs. So very happy to share more about this with Anna, with everyone here in a moment.
Fantastic. Well, brilliant to have both of you with us. Before we dive in, I'm just going to give a very quick introduction to Normative for those of you joining who aren't as familiar with us. So we're one of the original players in the carbon accounting space. So we've been doing this for over 12 years, way before it was a trend and as commonplace as it is now. But what that means is we spent a lot of time and expertise to ensure that we deliver really accurate carbon calculations for our customers. You can see some of the results of that on this slide. So we're very proud to have a 93% customer satisfaction score, and importantly, 100% success rate across all client audits, which I know is front of mind for many coming into this time of year. It's also important for us as an organisation at Normative to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. So we've had our own SBTi targets validated as well as a sign of our commitment to our own net zero journey, as well as supporting all of our customers throughout the year. And we're delighted to say that this track record has earned us the trust of a lot of leading companies across a wide range of industries, as you can see on the slide here, that we work with throughout the year to calculate, manage and reduce their carbon emissions. So that's a very brief introduction to Normative, but now I want to get right into the heart of today's webinar and hand over to you, Anna, to give us an introduction really to Business Sweden and to put your role at COPs into a bit of context for everyone.
Thank you so much for that. And going right ahead, maybe to explain a bit about what Business Sweden is for those of you who might not know. I hope I was able to move the slide now. I think it works. So maybe just briefly then about what is Business Sweden. So Business Sweden is formerly the Swedish Trade and Invest Council. We're a semi-governmental organization owned by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and so to say the Swedish business side, and with the purpose of really supporting Swedish companies growing abroad, as well as international companies investing and expanding in Sweden. And here you get a quick glimpse of how long we've been around, and we have an esteemed team spread across various parts of the globe. Something that comes in handy in global projects such as COP, since we have local competence and expertise to utilize in most of its destinations. So on the one hand, you could then say it's about supporting businesses individually in their expansion journey, but another part of it is really to gather industry and private sector to in core areas where we see that Sweden could have a clear impact. And the COP engagement and the way it has been running is a clear example of that, and that has been developed in close dialogue with the private sector and key enabling agencies and stakeholders for the past some years. I'll come back to that in a bit. So we're very proud to gather the so-called non-negotiating delegation, and I'll come back to that particular name in a minute as well. But what it means is really that we see that the private sector has, we gather a delegation of private sector actors with solutions and thought leadership, and also some enabling governmental agencies to really showcase the full Swedish offering, if you will. And why then Sweden, the climate matchmaker? Well, that builds on the fact that we see it's supposed to serve to unite urgency with solutions to build resilience and prosperous societies. So in sum, that means, where can Sweden contribute to a greater extent to accelerating the Paris Agreement, but also who do we partner with, and what global partnerships can we form that can also support Sweden in its own climate transition. So thereby coming back to what does the non-negotiating delegation then mean, and what is then the Swedish pavilion on site at COP, if we talk about that specifically? Well, in parallel, there's also COP means Conference of the Parties, and the one leading the negotiating delegation from the Swedish side is our climate ambassador, Matthias Frumeri, and these are then subject matter experts that sit and negotiate in various parts of the Paris Agreement, while then we join with the so-called non-negotiating delegation, which gathers, again, as mentioned, the private sector to really emphasize and to contribute with seeing that the solutions are available today to meet for the pathway towards the 1.5 target, and how can we be a contributing factor and showing that awareness of what is really available and around when it comes to that. Because as per the latest IPCC synthesis report, it does confirm that the pathway to limiting emissions and global warming is there, and we see that there are innovations for that. We see that there is available finance for that, but the need is really to unlock it and also have the enabling policies in place that really unlock that and foster and support and emphasizes on the solutions and innovations that are available today. We have recently, if you have followed, we will speak about New York a little bit in a minute, but we recently launched a report, the Road to COP report, which also outlines very much the available innovations and the enabling conditions that are needed to also really implement then the NDCs. That is also going to be a hot topic, of course, has been a hot topic this year and also will be a hot topic leading up to Belém. And before I then also conclude, before we also dig in more into that dialogue in a short bit, I also encourage you to visit our homepage, where you can find the report, where you can find an overview of the delegation, where we will also launch the program of what will be happening in the Swedish pavilion during COP, and many more updates. So I encourage you also to engage with us there and to follow suit there on what's to come. With that, I stop and I hand over then to you, Alex.
Thank you very much. Great overview, and I can only encourage everyone to check out the Business Sweden homepage and also follow along as we approach COP30. So I know there's always a lot of material being shared and broadcasted during those days and weeks, this time in Belém. So definitely tune in, it's very interesting. And why is it interesting? So that's a bit my part. Why it's interesting also for the private sector. So you might imagine, based on everything you've heard now from Anna, but also from what you might have read before, this is ultimately the UN Conference of the Parties, the UNFCCC annual gathering, where it's going to be negotiated about how to actually achieve and reach the goals set forth in the Paris Agreement. So it sounds like a lot of policy, a lot of governmental, country level or UN level conversations, but why actually is the private sector relevant here? So I just have a few thoughts to share with you. And then we're going to go into discussion with Anna, because both of us have been recently also in New York, where it's kind of like the eve of COP, where a lot of these topics have already been discussed. So what I put here on the screen are snapshots, admittedly of articles that we wrote after having been to one of the past conferences. But what you can see in just by looking at the titles already, there's a lot of business interest, momentum, and opportunity here in those COPs. So what, top left corner, the first article here says COP nudges businesses towards sustainability. COP28 Normative was there to, quote unquote, close the execution gap. So meaning what has been said and promised to what actually happens on the ground in business, but of course also the leading up to policy. And last year in Baku, Christian and I were there, and kind of the takeaway from us was businesses must drive the net zero transition. So why is this important? How does it link into each other? Well, or Anna also shared that the UN and country level representatives are negotiating what needs to happen in terms of country level contributions. Anna just mentioned NDCs. Those are those nationally determined contributions. In essence, countries' climate targets, right? So the EU collectively has a climate target. Brazil, for example, the host country, has a climate target, and other large nations such as China and the US have also climate targets. Now, those targets are great, and they should collectively add up to the Paris Agreement of keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, however, countries have set targets and might also have some implementation plans, but without the private sector actually implementing and reducing emissions, countries won't get there. So there are different mechanisms in which this can happen. The most obvious one, I think Mike also mentioned it at the beginning, is of course regulation, right? Like is forcing companies to actually go there, to go the extra mile and to disclose and reduce their own emissions. Now, interestingly, however, we want to point at opportunities here for businesses, not just be prepared for whatever policy is to come, but actually there's opportunity here in aligning your own ambitions as to transitioning and becoming more resilient with the nationally determined contributions and national transition plans. So we really believe that these dialogues, and I've seen in the past, these dialogues between policymakers and UN delegates such as Matthias Fumari, whom we are of course very close to here in Sweden, these dialogues are really beneficial and can drive important win-win outcomes for businesses and the countries. Specifically this year, COP30, which is going to happen, as we said multiple times now, in Brazil, in the city of Belém. On the right-hand side, you see here the 7th letter of the COP president to pretty much, well, in this case, a lot addressed at businesses. And interestingly here, it is highlighted. You see it. I mean, if you can read it, the last section that I still managed to squeeze into the screenshot is about the private sector's role in shaping what is here called the new climate economy. And there is going to be talks around these NDCs, which we pick up probably in a second as well. There's also this new action agenda, like a blueprint for collective climate action, again, joining the policy side and the business side. Then ultimately, very, very importantly, the implementation aspect. So climate action really positioned as and realized as a business opportunity. So in essence, to highlight, it is not as abstract and divorced as you might think it is on surface. There's a lot of, quite honestly, selfish interest from businesses to go there, to be at the table, to discuss, negotiate, and also support ambitious policy, because there are clear win-win outcomes. And that is why Normative is so happy about this partnership with Business Sweden that enables us to actually get a seat at the table, be heard, but also hear the download from policymakers, of course. Now, I hope this gave a bit of an overview before we hopefully have some more questions from the audience and some discussions. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you. Well, thank you both, Alex and Anna, for putting that into context, both organisations' engagement at COP and in particular. Looking forward to what we're expecting, what we're going to focus on at this year's event, which is what we're going to start digging into a bit more now in this panel discussion. And just looping back to Anna's presentation, we can share a link with you to the Business Sweden homepage. It should pop up for you all attending on your screen. Yes, there it is. So if you want to go and check out in more detail what Business Sweden is focused on, please do head over there and take a look. So we're going to jump into the panel discussion now, and as a way of kicking things off, I know both of you were at Climate Week New York recently, which is of course the last major milestone of the year before COP each year. So I'd love to start with that, and perhaps Anna, starting with you. Could you talk us through a bit the mood on the ground at the event, and any of the key takeaways from your conversations and the conversations across the Business Sweden team at New York?
No, absolutely. And I think I think also when talking about these stepping stones, such as Climate Week New York and many of these other ones that happen along the year, they are of course, same as COP, they're hosted in a country, but it is very much a global event that gathers global stakeholders, because I guess some might say an elephant in the room is, US also withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. Did that have an impact, so to speak, on the discussions and so forth in New York itself? I would say it's still quite. I still think it's quite a strong emphasis on ambition still. We know that the NDCs, the deadline was formally now in February this year, but with some delays in some countries. So that is, of course, still expected to come in, also to get a more full picture, of course, of where the ambitions lie. I think quite a few stakeholders also emphasize on, less so much the talk, but how can we really move this into action? And we come back a lot to the NDCs, but it's the reason for why the NDCs are so important is also because that is really that can be made into a very strong instrument if very closely tied to investments and ambitions that are to be rolled out. So I think for that purpose, I'd say ambition was still high. We hear words such as building on resilience. We hear also I think even in a stronger emphasis also pushing the economic prosperity of the transition. So one key figure that kept coming up was over 90% of new renewables. I believe it was Irina who put this together. Over 90% of new renewables are in fact more cost effective than the fossil equivalent. So I think we hear a bit of the language also emphasizing resilience and the economic benefits, as Alex also mentioned. But yeah, more action, less talking.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And I think you mentioned importantly the NDCs, and we'll dig into that in a bit more detail in this discussion as well. But yeah, it's good to hear, and I think it's an imperative at the moment that focus is turning to action and practical things. I'm sure for lots of those of you attending today, kind of that ties directly into like how is this going to affect your business? How can you in the private sector take a lead and contribute to taking this action? Alex, I'll hand over to you as well. Likewise, from your discussions, involvement at the event, what were your key takeaways?
Yeah, so I think Anna summarized it quite well. It was actually encouraging to have seen one of the largest installments, I think actually the largest of New York Climate Week so far, with more than 1,000 events spanned out over the period of roughly 7 days in New York. So definitely not a withdrawal. What I would say is, as to like the sentiment on the ground, there was less public, big stages, big announcement, big new commitments, which is also understandable because, but to Anna's point, what Anna was hinting at, we have all the commitments, we have those big statements. What we now need is actually action. So in that context, it does make sense that things are moving a bit more towards roundtable discussions, towards more intimate, closed-door conversations. So to be honest, I've been at many, many events now in that week, but the most interesting and the most kind of fruitful ones were the ones that were closer, intimate, roundtable, and actually talking about how could we as a multi-stakeholder construct, so for example, policies, civil society, academia, and the business sector, how can we together solve challenges around, and it's now to Mike's question, Mike, to your question around like the core themes there, how can we together address challenges such as supply chain transparency, trust in data? How can we make sense of the quite at times confusing space of regulation and standards and frameworks, and how can we work together to get to more clarity? So I think a few of the main points were around data integrity, data standards, and how they can move more towards supporting businesses and not confusing or adding extra work. And then, of course, the NDCs were front and center, even though they were not negotiated or discussed there. We had a few announcements throughout the week, encouragingly also from China. that have now for the first time actually set some hard targets. Admittedly, we would have hoped for even more in terms of, or we actually would need more as to for the numbers that they add up, as to how much China has to reduce their emissions to be in line with the Paris Agreement. But it's encouraging to see actually a nation like China stepping forward, which again gives momentum to the whole supply chain debate around decarbonizing, helping to decarbonize suppliers in that area as well. So those were a few reflections to start off.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, as you say, encouraging signs, and yeah, quite a notable shift from, as you say, we've got those big commitments already. It's about, okay, those sounds like those smaller groups more focused on how can we actually turn this into some practical next steps and action, which is good to hear. Just a reminder for all of you, we'll continue with our panel discussion now, but if you have any questions yourself that you want to pose to Anna and Alex, please do drop it in the question box on your screen in the bottom right, and we will get to you later on in the webinar. Having kind of gone through the highlights, some of those key takeaways from New York, I'll be interested to hear from you then, Anna. Has anything from the event informed your plan, or will inform Business Sweden's plans for COP30 in Brazil in a few weeks' time?
I would say that they rather emphasized, I think, the message that we have and the way that that the delegation and that we kind of approach the COP, and kind of what we would how we would like to utilize that unique platform that it is, and that unique space and forum with decision makers. And I think I mentioned the report previously. I can very much recommend anyone listening in to just have a read through that, because it has across quite a few sectors, so energy, transport, waste, industry, food and ag, buildings, quite a few also call to actions on policy and needs that the delegation and the different actors really see when it comes to that. And I think the thing that it has emphasized is that we are looking towards enabling more action at COP, but as well as beyond in the dialogues that we have. That could mean raising awareness in sessions in the pavilion. It could also mean what we do in more intimate roundtables, as Alex mentioned. That's of course a lot of the of action happens in closer forums. So I think for us, it's more given us a good let's say pat on the back, or a wind towards what we are aiming at, which seems to be very, very valuable, with the help of and the great engagement, of course, of Normative and the companies that we have with us.
Well, it's good to hear that there's that common thread going into COP. And as we sort of move onto that and this year's COP in particular, I'll hand over to you, Alex. We touched on this at the beginning of the panel session, but those nationally determined contributions, or the NDCs as they'll commonly be referred to, from a private sector perspective, what is the relevance of some of the key agenda items there?
Okay, so I would say this is really interesting now because those new rounds of NDCs are reaching up to 2035. So I would say there's really crunch time for a lot of your companies, a lot of companies out there. Some of them have targets already towards 2030, 2035, 2040. So let's just say you have or think about or you need to have these targets and transition plans in place. I work with or kind of Normative, of course, as a platform provider, works with several companies that are setting these targets, that have transition plans. Now, what we see over and over again is that at one point you might actually encounter dependencies in the ecosystem, especially in the policy environment, when you want to decarbonize. Let's just say you are a company that's operating more or less globally, or let's just say you're operating in Asia, because I just mentioned China before, right? So you have a certain part of your supply chain sitting in China, sitting in Southeast Asia. Now, you have targets on decarbonizing your supply chain, and your suppliers, of course, are super relevant there. So if your suppliers keep, quote unquote, polluting keep having high CO2 emissions, you have to nudge them, encourage them to reduce their emissions. Now, the problem, of course, is if, let's say, those suppliers say, hey, we do everything we can, but we just don't have access to green energy, to renewable energy coming from the grid. So what can you do? If in the country, in the sector, in the region, there's just a lack of energy, renewable energy access to your SMEs, they can't really decarbonize, meaning further up or like downstream for you, you really can't meet your targets with those suppliers. So you might actually be forced to switch suppliers to an entirely different geography, which is highly expensive, maybe not even feasible. Maybe you need materials expertise from a certain region. So all that just to illustrate an example of where you bump against local kind of restrictions. So working together with or looking at the coming NDCs and seeing what actually are the ambitions of China. Again, not picking on China, just having one example here, of China to get renewable energy up as in the energy mix. It's going to be very, very relevant for you as a business. So observing what is right now being pledged, but then also supporting governments. And it sounds maybe a bit abstract, like why do governments need support? I do strongly believe and have seen that they need, and the kind of the confidence of the business sector, of the private sectors, to say we actually need and want you to set these ambitious policies, because we then can also invest more. And that's a bit to Anna's point, making these NDCs investable, meaning helping, reaching a helping hand towards the public sector for ambitious NDCs that then businesses can invest in, meaning coming in with technology know-how, like Business Sweden as the matchmaker does, for example, again, this COP, to then create those win-win outcomes. So a bit long-winded way of showing the dependencies and the interest of businesses, the relevance of NDCs for businesses.
No, that's great, Alex, and not long-winded at all. It's great to, I think, put it into context. Often, yeah, COP can, there's discussions at such a high level and so much is kind of covered. I think it's great to distill that into some what could be practical impacts on businesses. So no, I think that's great to paint that picture. Anna, is there anything else in terms of big agenda items in the 2 weeks in Belém that you think are going to be important? You want to elaborate a bit further on?
No, of course, and I think it's always going to be interesting. I mean, as the letter that Alex showed previously from the presidency, I mean, it will of course be interesting to follow kind of the ambitions and the kind of the mark that each COP presidency wants to set for their COP. So I think, I mean, of course, topics such as forestry, biodiversity, and circularity have been kind of key areas that have been coming up, and we try to also, to a great extent, to kind of find a good match there between like the priorities that, of course, the presidency sets out, along of course with the ones that mirror the Swedish offering in a good way. So I think we will follow that quite closely. Another thing I think there will be, I mean, again, it's while it's only a few weeks away, it's still a month, so a lot can happen in those couple of weeks. And I think one thing that will be interesting to follow is, of course, the NDC synthesis report that is expected to come out. That also kind of, so again, the deadline for the NDCs was earlier this year, but kind of to gather kind of the accumulated ambitions, or get at least a sense of how we are doing when it comes to reaching the goals. I think that will also be a bit of an interesting, it's going to be interesting to see what effect that will have. Of course, also coming up towards COP, and what will be highlighted because of it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up that report, and it's definitely one to look out for, as you say, as we get closer to the event. I want to wrap up the panel discussion now with a final question to both of you, and I'll come to you first, Alex, on this. But what would be a great outcome from this year's COP? And this could be either from an organizational perspective or looking at things more holistically. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's a big question, because there, of course, as you already illustrated, there are so many dimensions to it, right? So there are the official negotiations, there are certain outcomes we would love to see. Then there are on the, like, that's the macro level, and then on the micro level, will be so important for each and every organization that engages on the ground to kind of take something away that is a positive signal. So let's take the, I mean, not going to steal Anna's thunder, but take the example of the matchmaking. It would be amazing, of course, to see matches being made, meaning we can actually support each other, businesses and the public sector, the policymakers there. Quickly on the macro, I do strongly hope, and I think it's only a hope at this point in time, that we get all NDCs or critical amounts of NDCs in. I think the last stock take, stock take is a almost like a loaded word because there are these global stock takes out there. But the last time around New York that has been that all NDCs have been checked, I believe we reached around like half of the commitments, half of roughly the emissions that would need to be reduced under the Paris Agreement by the existing NDC, which was clearly not enough. And don't quote me on the number, it might actually have been less than half. So we need definitely to step up. And this includes us here. So EU has so far failed to actually submit their the NDCs. And funnily enough, they're of course criticizing other countries for lack of ambitions in NDCs, while the EU as a bloc has not yet submitted their own. So we have to really look at our own house or keep our own house in order first. So NDC side, I do strongly hope that politicians, delegates get their act together and really now commit to ambitious targets. From the private sector side, again, as a company like Normative, we would love to send a strong signal. I think Normative has a special place here as a software provider to enable, to accelerate companies' own transition, to also in turn give those companies the signal towards, hey, we are here to actually support you. We are here to help you actually reach your targets, set and reach your targets holistically. And hopefully also with what we've shown here, we have the connection, the connective tissue, so to speak, with the public sector to carry you all the way. So it'll be one of the hopes from Normative's perspective.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you, Alex. And yeah, Anna, likewise, posed the same question to you, I guess both from Business Sweden perspective as well.
Sure. No, and I think the whole framework and kind of the purpose and the urgency that drives, so to say, Sweden, the climate matchmaker as a concept, and the basis for the work that we do there, I think is to a great extent it's about, of course, minimizing and limiting bridging the implementation gaps between what is needed to be done with the solutions that are out there, and with, of course, enabling policies and blended, often blended, but finance in the middle to kind of enable that in a long way. So I think for those kinds of actors to come together, to be able to come up with concrete, like literally, let's say on like a project basis. I mean, we're at that level where we could do that, and also showcase the good examples that are already out there. I think we should never underestimate a bit to what Alex mentioned initially, what trust that builds also in the different kinds of, let's say, silos or the different kinds of stakeholders that are at COP. I think just knowing, I think our humble opinion is that if we know that also policymakers are, when they're well equipped with the solutions and possibilities that are available, maybe it's also easier to make good and ambitious goals and targets and roadmaps to enable that. So I think anywhere we can enable that, and the way that Sweden can play a part in that at COP is what we're here for.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, sure, it's going to be a busy month or so coming up for both of you and many others at the event. But yeah, thank you both for that kind of like, yeah, the kind of the inside track on what the focus is going to be or could be from this year's event. We're going to wrap up in a moment with a couple of questions quickly before we close off the session today. So if it's your last chance, I guess, if you want to put a question into Alex or Anna. I will come to you first, Alex. One question around kind of, do you believe there's been much progress since COP29 with regards to, we've been talking about businesses taking a leading role in driving us towards meeting net zero targets and getting us on the right path. Have you seen much progress since last year and the outcomes from last year as we're coming up to COP30 now in Brazil?
The progress question, I feel like every year we ask ourselves again and again, right? Where are we? Normative, we used to have a few studies around the progress made, commitments, and then what is kind of like covered by commitments. As I said before, let's look at action now. Like the commitments are there. We know this. We've shown this. We have the numbers. Commitments cover pretty much 90%. That was last time we checked of the global emissions. Now it's really time to take action. So yeah, Mike, to your question, leadership, honestly, I think is still a lack of leadership and policy leadership in the business sector. What I actually want to put out there, maybe a bit as a provocative statement, we have seen, and again, one of the other potential elephants in the room, which we haven't discussed yet, we have seen quite the policy backlash. Again, looking at where we stand right now, where we sit, or right now, the EU, there has been a lot of confusion, honestly, for businesses, and very, very likely a lot of rollback from the major legislations. Now, this doesn't help anyone. This doesn't show leadership. This is just confusing and frustrating, to be honest. And then paired with lack of NDC commitment from the EU side, you really see policy not taking leadership role that has been there. But now to the provocative statement, I would say that this actually is an opportunity, or has shown to be an opportunity, because many businesses that have been just reporting, disclosing because they had to, they now shift gears and now realize, actually, I want to, actually, I must, but must from a point of view of, if I still want to be relevant in 5, 10, 15 years from now, I better get my house in order. I better look at my supply chain. I better assess the risk that is climate related, because no matter what's happening from policy side, the climate is going to keep changing. We know this from a scientific fact, or from a scientific research. So I better prepare my supply chain to become more resilient and to adapt. But I don't know where to start if I haven't used providers like Normative to actually assess where do I stand right now to begin with. So my hopeful message here, or what I see is happening, is businesses shift and realize, oh, it's actually in my own interest to do this right, to set ambitious, to know where I am right now, assess my inventory, and then set ambitious targets and actually follow through with implementation, not pushed by regulation, but actually pulled by their own business interest. So I would say this is a hopeful note to start off on, if it's paired then also with the ambitious policy environment that enables companies to follow through with their ambitious targets.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. And yeah, always important to focus on that opportunity to say it's not just a regulatory thing, the tick box, but there are lots of opportunities and potential risks to address within this. Finally, then, Anna, before we wrap up, I just come to you with one question we've got around how does Business Sweden's role and priorities at COP tie in with those of business delegations from other nations, and are there any common priorities as you see it?
Yeah, no, and that's a great question, and I think, you know, we do have a quite close dialogue with our Nordic colleagues. Also, we've had some you know, we have collaborations on stakeholders, and we have some you know, great exchanges there, and have had some more formalized collaborations also in the past. But I would also say that, based kind of on an overall perspective, on like a holistic perspective, I think it's also quite unique the way that Sweden is positioned at COP as such. I mean, Sweden is also always in many different forms been known also for collaborating across, and you know, initially called triple helix model, I think is now we're at quadruple or quintable helix at this point, where we're really quite used to collaborating across you know, different parts of society. And that is really what also the presence there has gathered. And I think wherever we see great collaboration, we want to reach globally to a great extent. We have, I believe, last time I checked, had contact with some 100 organizations across the 5 years that we've had a Swedish pavilion on site at COP. So I think we stretch and see where the greatest value add and the greatest impact can be, along with the global partners. And that's, of course, also what we are planning and gearing up for this COP.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, it's great to hear that. Yeah, there is that synergy across a number of the delegations going to the event. Very quickly, we've want to address just one last question before we wrap up, coming from Mark, and I will put this to you, Alex. Do you foresee the EU slowing down the pace of introducing new sustainability regulations to allow businesses more time to implement, measure, and demonstrate the benefits of existing frameworks such as CSRD?
Yeah, to keep it short, that's what we see right now. So we see right now is slowing down. So there have been new regulations such as the EUTR, this deforestation law, but also the CSDDD, and last but not least, the CBAM. So CSDDD is supply chain due diligence, and CBAM is the carbon border, or like cross-border adjustment mechanism. So meaning the disclosing carbon impact of imported goods and services. All of those have been delayed, watered down, and honestly made a bit more confusing. So yes, we see this, and the CSRD is still, the scope is still revised in context of this EU omnibus package. So to your point, we do see this slowing down. However, I would not argue that this is meant to allow businesses to more time to implement, measure, demonstrate. I think right now it is just a lot of question marks. What actually is the purpose here? The simplification that is aspired to is just causing, honestly, almost useless reports if we exclude 80% or more of companies that have originally been asked to disclose. So I do hope they ramp up the ambition level again, while then, of course, making it realistic for companies to comply. So let's see. I don't think we need new regulation. I think we have now, with those mentioned, those frameworks will be amazing if they interact and interoperate well. But it is to be seen how far the EU is able to deliver those as a comprehensive package that is realistic, but also very ambitious.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Mark. And as ever, it's a big question, right? But I think you've done a great job of giving a very good, concise, and accurate assessment in your answer there, Alex. So that wraps us up for the Q&A and for the webinar today. Just remains for me to say thank you very much to you, Anna, and yourself, Alex, for joining us today. It's been fantastic to have you on, and as we say, it's the partnership with Business Sweden is always of great value to Normative. So really looking forward to getting to COP30 with you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you to all of you who have joined the webinar today. If you want to take a look specifically at what Normative could do for your business, we'll pop up a link just now on your screens if you want to talk to one of our consultants and take a look at the platform itself. But otherwise, thank you for joining today. As I said at the top of the session, you can watch the on-demand recording of this webinar from tomorrow. If you just go into your confirmation email and click that access link, you will be able to watch that video whenever you want to look back. So thank you, everyone, for your time and for your insights today. And we look forward to seeing you on one of our webinars again soon.